Hey guys, so it's Jeff again. This is the video on the fourth event in the last 4 or 5 years, and kind of the final one um, of what we're going to be talking about. If you see me looking off to the side, it's because I've got my back doors right over there, and so I'm always distracted by things go flying by or what have you. But I'll try to focus right in here for you guys. This last event, and we'll see how this one goes. It's a little more recent, a little more raw, and so we'll just have to see where it goes. Okay. So this last October, we had my dad move in with us. We had talked with him over the summer. The situation he was in um, previously was not a good situation for him, both emotionally and spiritually, and I don't know that it was really good for him physically either. um, but we had talked with him and made the offer to him over the last summer for him to come move in with us. Um, and so he had taken us up on that. And so last October, October 1st, actually, is when he moved in with us. And we were kind of excited. We knew there was going to be a challenge having dad here because he was in renal failure, so his kidneys weren't working. He was doing dialysis, home dialysis. So he had to be hooked up to his machine every night and had to have the flush emptied out of his drain bucket every day, and we had to watch his water intake, and we had to watch his food intake, and all of those different things that you don't really think about. But we became his primary caregivers, um, and but again, we were excited about being able to have him here with us and being able to provide that kind of care for him, and because he had been kind of, after mom died, he had remarried, and they had kind of went about their own life in their own way, and we weren't, we really didn't get a lot of contact. We got some, but not a lot. We talk every so often on the phone, but um, and that's understandable. They were living their life, getting their marriage set up and running, and that kind of stuff. And so anyway, so he decided that he would take us up on the offer, and he came to live with us on October, the beginning of October. Um, and he had some serious health issues when he came in. He had issues with his foot that nobody quite knew what was going on with it. He had some issues with calcification of his veins and blockages in his veins. And so uh, he had an operation shortly after he moved in with us, about 2, 3 weeks after he moved in with us, to have a stent put in his leg to get circulation back down to his feet, because they thought that's what the issue was, where he was losing circulation to his toes in one of his feet. And in all actuality, that was part of it, but I think it was further along than anybody knew. And there were some mix-ups on medications in that transition time frame that he should have been on. Could have had the surgery for it much earlier, and it was kind of a mess. But it does. The reason why I say that is because it does kind of come into the grief and the grieving part of it, and those emotions that you feel and those questions that you ask yourself. So he moved in the 1st of October, and the week before Thanksgiving he passed. So he was with us for about a month and a half, and there were a lot of things that happened in that month and a half. He had, like I said, the surgery to put the stent in his leg, which apparently was fairly good sized stent, according to the doctor. But he was having problems thinking coherently, and we didn't understand why, and we really didn't know because we hadn't been with him long enough to understand where he was at. We knew he had had cognitive issues because we could see it when we went to go visit him, but being with him 24/7, it really became apparent where he was at. Um, and he wasn't mentally where he usually was. Very smart man, very intelligent man, very gifted with his intelligence, and you could see the decline with it, and we knew that was present. What we didn't know was why, and he didn't quite know why either, or he couldn't verbalize why. But we do believe that's probably because it was part of the diabetes and the renal failure and the hardening of the arteries. All contributed to that and to the blood flow and that kind of stuff. Well, part of one of the issues with somebody who's in home or at home dialysis is that the cleanliness of the equipment that you're using is paramount because it's so easy to get an infection, um, and somehow Dad got an infection, and I think it was from a couple of different places. It might have been when he was doing his dialysis and hooking himself up to the machines. It could have come in from his feet when his toes were kind of dying and going gangrene. It could have been because he got a flu shot 3 weeks before he went into surgery, and that complicated his system or compromised his system as well. But he went in for surgery for a partial foot amputation because when his podiatrist finally had seen his foot and said, yeah, this is not going to go well, he's going to end up losing more of his foot and we'll be right back here in 30 days from now having to take off more. Let's just do a partial foot amputation and we'll be done. And that was kind of the decision that was made. And so we went in, and little did we know that when he went into the surgery, initially we took him to the hospital that he wouldn't be coming home. I don't think it was long into his stay at the hospital before he realized that it was not going to get better. The surgery for the amputation went fine. It was the complications after that did not go fine. And so he ended up going into AFib about a day after the surgery, and just a very erratic heartbeat. They tried everything they could, and so for 2 days he was high touch. I don't know, he was on their cardiac unit, so they could monitor him with what was going on, and they worked hard to get him back down to a normal heart rhythm. The problem with that was that he even more of his mental capabilities were slipping away, and you could see him having conversations with Mom, who obviously had passed, wasn't there. He would look at you, know you were there, he'd recognize who you were, but he couldn't verbalize anything. And that's tough. Dad was always, throughout everything, he was always that stability in our lives. We moved because of him, because he was career military, and but he was always there. He was always that, no matter what, even if in the last couple of years we didn't have a lot of interactions, you just kind of knew Dad was there. So he was kind of that stabilizing force for me. I won't speak for my brothers, but I believe he was for them as well. But you watch this man within the space of 30 days go from good to horrible, and you can do nothing about it. And in talking with his doctors, the infection is probably really what what did most of the damage for him. And we come to find that in older people, when they get an infection, they don't keep their mental awareness, and they start having signs of dementia, and that's one of the first classic signs of a massive infection. And then they did testing on his fluid from his dialysis, and that proved that there was an infection as well. And so Dad was with us for a month and a half, and it doesn't seem like it's that long. And I absolutely know there are people out there that are full-time caretakers for their parents or family members for years and years and years and years. So it's not to discount anything from that. But when this, month and a half that you're the primary caretaker, it does take a toll on you to get into that caretaker mode, and you're always on. You're always on. You just don't relax. You're listening for household noises you don't normally hear, when somebody else is in your house. And there's one night when Dad moved in, and it wasn't that long after he moved in, we kind of find out the next morning that he had fallen, and it took him 2 hours to be able to get back up because he didn't have the strength in his legs, and we didn't know. And so we're always nervous during the day when we had to leave for work. How is he going to be, and is he going to be okay when we get home, and those types of things. And you see this man who's always been mobile in your life and always been, full of life, and he's basically relegated to a recliner, and that's his favorite place to be because that's where he's not in pain anymore. And so you end up sleeping not necessarily in the same room, but you end up sleeping outside of his room, or when he's asleep in the living room because it wears him out to get into bed, you end up sleeping in the living room with him just to make sure he's okay. So you have this 24/7 provider mentality, and you're always on edge waiting to hear that something's went wrong. Anyways, so we're at the hospital, and we're going through this process of watching him, and my oldest brother, I have the blessing of having him live in the same area, so he and I were able to kind of to work out schedules with Dad while he was in the hospital. And it's just rough. It's rough because even though the doctors won't tell you, and Sherry and I talked, and I told her on more than one occasion, Dad's not coming home, no matter what. He's not going to make it. And thank God, praise God, we had the foresight enough that when Dad first came to live with us, to have him do a living will, and a healthcare directive, and power of attorney, and all the normal legal documentation. He didn't have any of that. And so if nothing else comes out of this video, make sure for you, whoever you are that's watching this, those are the core essential documents you need to have. You need to have a will, you need to have a power of attorney, and you need to have a living will, a durable healthcare directive. Because one of the things that saved us a very hard decision, even though we had to make it, was when it was time to stop any kind of support for him. And that's a hard decision to make. But Dad had it spelled out clearly in his health directive. And we had some great doctors that were able to say, if you go this next step, you are stepping over the line of what he wanted. And these are doctors who cared about him, who were his doctors and knew him. And it was so comforting to have a doctor to be able to honestly speak to us and say, listen, if you go this route, you're going against his wishes. And it's human nature, I think, to want to keep your loved one alive as long as possible. It's selfish, and understandably so it's selfish, because we're hopeful beings, and we want to hope that things will get better. And in reality, they're not going to get better, and they weren't going to get better for Dad. And so when you you have to make that decision. And all three of us boys got together. I have another middle brother that's in Arizona, and we got him on the phone and we explained it to him. And we all wrote the same decision that yes, this is what Dad wanted. He does not want to be on life support, and he clearly spelled out what he did not want, and he didn't want a feeding tube, and that's where we were going to have to go with him. And that's when the doc said, no, that's beyond what he wants. Okay, great, but you're taking steps not to continue his life. And no matter whether the person spells that out or not, it's never an easy decision to look at the doctors and go, yeah, don't do that. Take it all off. And they had given Dad, probably because of the stage of kidney failure he was in anyways, normally, they said usually it's about 2 to 3 days and they go peacefully. And we thought, okay, that's great. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, he'll come home with us and he's going to come home to die, because that really was his wish as well. And I'll be 100% honest. I was concerned about him coming home to die, because Seamus, my youngest son, was still living at home at the time. And I didn't want him to associate that with the house. And I didn't want him to come home one day from school or from work and be like, is Grandpa alive, still or not, and have to live through that. We lived through that with Sherry's mother-in-law when she passed, and she was living with my brother-in-law and his partner in Colombia, and shout out to those two. It turns your house upside down. It really does, because you make all these accommodations. And you change everything about your life because you love them. And you would do it over and over and over again. And they did. But yet, once Mom had passed, how do you get back to normal, right? And so you always associate things with rooms and with things and that kind of stuff. And so that was a concern for me with bringing Dad home. And the social workers said, point blank asked, are you ready for this? And I went, no, but we're going to do it anyways, because that's what Dad wanted. Now, the blessing of a benevolent God is that Dad didn't make it until the next morning. They had put him on pain meds for pain management, and Sherry and I spent the night in the hospital that night with him, because we did not want him to be alone. And we promised him he would not be alone, because that was the reason why he wanted to pass at home. He wanted to die at home because he didn't want to be alone. And so, unfortunately, my brother wasn't able to get there in time, because, of course, it's November and we did Missouri, and they decided to have a snowstorm, the night that Dad's passing. So he couldn't get there fast enough when we realized what was happening. And Sherry and I had spent the night in his room with him. And I woke up 10 minutes before he passed. And I'm just sitting there listening to his breathing, because it's become so even and so shallow. And it was so peaceful. He just stopped. He just stopped breathing. And if I have to die, I'm going to die at some point. But when that happens, I pray that it was that peaceful. I pray that. Because I don't want my family and my kids having to deal with my grandkids or whoever's taking care of me when I get to that point in my life, to have to see me anything other than peaceful. He wasn't in pain, and he was ready to go. He was ready to go, and that gives us some comfort. So Dad passing is that fourth event, and this grief was a different kind. This one sent it over the top. That grief container, it might as well not have been there. Um, it it's still kind of tough, but it's only been what, 6 months, 8 months, something like that. I don't know anymore. Can't even count the months anymore. Um, but what happened was that it wasn't just the grief of dad passing; it was the grief of all these other events over the last 4 years, kind of built up. And I'll tell you, I'm not prone to depression. I'm prone to, um, I don't know what it is, but sometimes there's dark places in my life that I end up going, and I don't like going there, but it's just like it happens. And I've never really been depressed before. There have been events in my life where I've been like, I don't want to get out of bed, but you always drag yourself up by your bootstraps, and you continue to march. But this one was different. And I think there was still too much in my grief container, and it wasn't dissipating fast enough. And Dad, I think, having been face to face with him for a month and a half, primary caregiver status, setting out his meds for him and getting his food for the day around and taking him to his doctor's appointments and being his liaison with the doctor's offices and taking him to his kidney doctor appointments and doing all of these things. And it was just, it was a lot. And suddenly you're not, right? Suddenly you're like, whoa, what happened? What happened, but you're like, oh my gosh. But when Dad passed that morning, and I knew that afternoon, the afternoon before, I knew he would not make it 24 hours. In my spirit, I just knew that he would not make it 24 hours. And I told Sherry, I said, he won't make it through the night. He won't make it to come home. I said, and that's why we're not leaving. Well, I said, that's why I'm not leaving. Sherry is the strongest woman I know. She has walked some paths with me that I would never ask anybody else to walk. And she has stepped up and been more than I ever would have thought possible. So when we talk about divine intervention and we talk about God putting the right people in our lives, yeah, I'd say that was it. That's what God did. So I'm gonna take a break and come back and do a second part to this video. It probably won't be as long as this one because this is sitting on about 22 minutes or something like that. So anyways, let me take a quick break and I'll be right back. Thanks, guys. Hang in there.